Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fed Up with me, Fed Up Gaz, the eternal miserable one. Joining me today is Fiona from the band Fallen Arise. How is it going this evening?
It's going very well, thanks.
Going great, hey. For those who may not have heard the band before, could you just tell us a bit about who you are in the band, and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So originally the band is based in Greece and has been, well, probably going now for well over 10 years.
Mm.
So we're, I think, the third album in now of symphonic metal. So that's really the roots of the band, where the band came from. I think in the last album, Enigma, which you've got a nice backdrop there on the background, we've probably experimented a little bit more with different approaches, moving a little bit away from very symphonic features in every track to having elements. So we've got a bit more space and experimentation and room for the guitar. So that's really where we kind of are now, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Fiona, because I watched a video update from some of the other guys in the band, and they were mentioning that they don't like to make every album the same. They don't want to recycle the material. And I was listening to Enigma this week, and I noticed on one track, Forever Winter, one of the later tracks on the album, concept I can identify with being from the north, Forever Winter. But anyway, I digress. I noticed you I could even hear like quite a heavier gothic, even horror vibe coming in. It was there, I had to really listen. So is it going to be, I'm going to try and behave because we don't want to obviously give too much away about the new album, but is it going to be radically different in the music?
I think it will be a little bit different. And I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis on what we can do with guitar a little bit more. So still having that orchestration and that piano element supporting everything that we do, but probably not as front and center as it perhaps was. But I think there is also space for it to be, I think a really interesting parallel with guitar at times, but we'd like to do more with guitar.
Yeah, you can certainly hear those axe riffs coming through on Enigma, on tracks like Reborn as well, Forsaken, which has got like that heavier axe vibe on it as well. So what I'm curious as well, and again, I'm going to have to behave myself. Do you change it up with the lyrics for each album as well, or do you always keep kind of like a central core theme?
That's an interesting question. I think that when I say listen to Adeline, which was before Enigma, the album before Enigma, it was interesting, this album, because that was more of a concept album, and Gus spent quite a lot of time thinking about how that was, and he took a lot of influence, I think, and inspiration from horror vibe, especially Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think there's some really interesting things, especially with the video for a couple of the songs, really excellent stuff. So I think this was one of the deeper elements of that album, thinking about the story and how the story grows. And certainly the character of Adeline, who was cursed, and different things she goes through during the album. So I always found that it was one of the things that attracted me to join Fallen Eyes, actually, because I found the story so interesting and the way that it grew. So, but I think with Enigma, especially with Reborn, it's the title track of the album in a way. Well, it's not what Enigma is, but for me, Reborn was the catalyst. That was the first song that we actually wrote. And I think it was to help us have a different direction, to think about how we can actually be, reborn in the essence of things. Especially because I think the band had gone through, the sort of growth that you get, the early days of the band with Ethereal was very much the storming phase, trying to figure out who you are, where your audience is, start to build that fan base. And then certainly with Adeline, it was really more establishing that. But with a concept album, it's always a little bit different, I think, than if it had been a collection of tracks that were perhaps a central theme running through, but were more in their own story in their own right, each song. So I think that's where we went with Enigma in terms of the stories. Each song has its own story to tell. It doesn't have a particular theme, although I think if you were going to break it down in a background, I would say there's probably that sense of renewal, that renewal vibe going across the different songs. Like being a bit lost and then finding yourself and being really sure of that. And I think that was where the band probably was going. And I was new to the band, a couple of years in at that point, actually, as was Blasses. So I think that was quite an interesting direction, because we initially wrote some lyrics in isolation from each other. But when we actually then sat down and put them together, it was really interesting how they were telling the same sort of story. And I think that was quite a nice aspect of Enigma, actually, that was particularly happening within that song. And it was quite enjoyable to see that come together.
Yeah, I bet. I think concept albums are always so interesting because, in a sense, it's literally like creating your own musical novel, especially if it's a story about a character. Like the story of Lilith, for example, is a fascinating one as well. There was a very famous Japanese female samurai called Tomo Gozen, who's got popular in recent years. And her story is absolutely remarkable. At that time, she was challenging men in duels, very, very successful. I think she fell in love with, possibly, I think it was the son of a shogun or something at that time. And I think when he passed away, she then joined the equivalent of a monastery, didn't want to be with anyone else because she loved him so dearly. And, stories like that always grab me because they've got that depth of emotion. There's the romance there as well, and you think of it's someone who's had such those strong feelings. And I think this is what I noticed with Enigma, and you were chatting about there, is although you were writing those lyrics and concepts at a distance at one time, and then when you got together, you're kind of coming up with the same things in common. And it's like that it's like those familiar struggles, the human existence, everything we all go through, those emotions. And that's probably what makes your lyrics relatable for listeners as well, because there's that deep sense of thought, emotion in there, things that people have gone through, even if it's a concept album about a character. So with that said, my long-winded rant, I can talk for the world. No wonder I'm not doing my throat any good at the moment. So is there any particular song then on Enigma? This is a loaded question, a two-parter for you, Fiona. The first part, which one do you feel really is your favorite in terms of the lyrics, that has a really good message and something that you think is really important and good for the listeners?
I think for me, the one that probably I was quite more emotional about than any other song, and Gus would certainly be nodding his head right now listening to that, was Forsaken. And I think that's, I was thinking a lot about the struggles that go on in the world, particularly in places where, perhaps this certainly less privileged than what we as people here in the UK or across, more affluent states in Europe have going on in everyday life. And I thought a lot about history and about struggles, particularly with women as well, and thinking about all sorts of issues. And certainly I think at the moment, given there's so much unrest in Europe and in the Middle East, that, it's about that sense of don't forget the humanity in this. What about the everyday people like you and I, who are just trying to live, and they're suddenly displaced as suddenly their world is torn in two. And, I think sometimes we live in so much information, the age of information, it's overload at times, that sometimes it's about stepping back and seeing that humanity and feeling that humanity. And I think that's what I was trying to, capture with Forsaken. And I was thinking a lot about some of the difficulties people have gone through, even people I know actually as well. I think can relate to that song in their own personal struggles. But yeah, I think that was the key one, I think, for me, in terms of being quite an emotional journey.
So have you always wanted that with music and the way you sing as well? You want that emotional connection and you want to put that across to people?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I do like to connect, and I think for me, when I'm on stage, for example, I think I feel every word I sing. I feel it, and I'm always looking into the audience for some sort of connection back in that same space. So, I mean, when you're up on the stage and there's a lot of lighting, it's not always that easy to see everybody, but you can always see people in the immediate vicinity of it's a really small venue, which is always great, very intimate. You can see quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I mean, it's brilliant playing the big stages. You can move around, you have the space, the sound is great, but you don't see and feel the audience as much as in the smaller venues. So I think when I'm up there singing those songs and I'm feeling the words, it's the emotion that I'm probably portraying and trying to get across, and I see it in people, and that bounces back to me, and I feel that connection. I hate to feel isolated when I'm up there. I think I like that back to that connection.
Yeah, that it's funny. The bands that I've talked to from all genres, they all say that it's nice to play those bigger venues. Of course, it is, especially at festivals. But you can't beat that feeling you get from a small venue, the intimacy, the atmosphere, that relationship you build with the audience. I remember talking with one of the earlier guests on the show, and I said, one of the most memorable shows that I went to was in Leeds, where I saw Opeth, and they played under I think it was the bridge that goes across to where the train station is, and it was right near, I think it was like a river or something in the background. Certainly could hear it, and it was so dark, and it was literally like some very ancient kind of wine cellar. And it was a small show, but the atmosphere was incredible, and the music and the vocals all kind of reverberated off the walls, and it had this really kind of dark gothic atmosphere as well, and it was fantastic. One of the most memorable shows I've seen for those reasons. So the second part of that question then, which are there any particular songs from Enigma musically that are favorites of yours that really grabbed you, that you thought, yeah, this one kind of captures everything I'm feeling about this particular track in that moment?
I think that this is difficult, actually. It's a difficult one for that Tuesday. Okay, so I think Forever Winter was, that I think musically, there's just this pace to it that I don't know. It just felt so comforting, but also so optimistic. Even though it's kind of, the lyrics are a little bit, we're never going to get out of winter. Certainly, in the UK, we feel that way. But despite that, aside from the lyrics and actually, them being quite telling quite a dark story in some respects, I kind of felt this pace to that particular song. But otherwise, I think Reborn, was quite a big one for me, because it just feels like you're going somewhere, and it's just it's that spark. I think two very different songs actually on the album, but I think that's where I was with them. I think maybe I'm a bit biased because we did start with Reborn, so it sort of always found a home and it got in there and it stayed, but it wasn't supplanted by another one. So
it's for Forever Winter, as I mentioned when we earlier, that was one of the standouts for me from Enigma as well when I was listening to it, for the reasons I mentioned. And visually, it does paint this winter landscape in my mind, and I'm going to go ultra nerdy here, but I see like a woman walking through this winter landscape, with a gothic dress on. Probably not the most ideal clothing to walk somewhere like that. It'd be a bit cold, but music does that to me, though. It really visually inspires my imagination, and that song particularly did that. And Reborn, again, that's such a universal concept, because it can have so many different meanings for us in our lives, to be reborn in our journey, or to find ourselves again, or always striving to become a better version of ourselves. So yeah, definitely. So when you when you were all working on the creative process together, I know you're based in the UK, and the rest of the band are in Athens, so obviously there's some distance at times. Do you all come up with the different ideas and lyrics, separately, and then do you meet up and kind of go through an editing process? I'm just wondering, how it works on.
Yeah, and I think it's been a little bit different this time. I think it is a little different now than maybe it was with Enigma. But in terms of Enigma, how we work things, and you learn through these processes. And I think we're purposely doing things slightly different as well, just because, you know, we know each other better now, and we know how we can get the best out of each other. When we started to write Enigma, yeah, I was quite new to the band at that point, and I think one of my earliest writing sessions with Gus, I was in Athens, and he was going through some melodies on the piano which were really, you know, we'll play that again, and ensure, you know, just we went round and round and round and got this sense of where we were going with the different songs. And that was interesting, because being together, the bounce of ideas between us was quite interesting, and we enjoyed that. So there was some basic, I'd say, the bones of the song in terms of the pacing, you know, what's going to work, it's also with any vocalist, what can I actually sing?
Yeah.
You know, the pace and the key and all sorts of things are so important to, you know, take account of. And so we sort of spent some time back and forth. So I'd go over for a few weeks, or I'd go over even just for a long weekend, go through some processes. But in the background to that, the other guys in the band, they were starting to think about the riffs, starting to think about, you know, the bass line. And then remotely, I'd be sent examples of how the track was starting to form. Gus was quite helpful in terms of giving structure guide. So there'd always be some kind of written guide. So this is where we're thinking of an introduction, then we'll have a bridge, maybe a chorus, etc. So it's very back and forth, and it kind of just grew over time. And then when it came to the recording process, I think we were quite ambitious, really, in terms of, okay, so I had the initial tracks in their sort of almost fullest form, but there was still quite a bit of work to do to actually lay the final guitars, solos. It was at that point, I think the rehearsal tracks I had were just a drum track that had been created to sort of give the rhythm. So going into the studio and hearing a little bit of more advanced sound was, ooh, okay. So I think that was quite interesting. But yeah, laying down the vocals, there was some work to do musically to change a few things, add a few things afterwards. So in a way, the vocals weren't actually the last thing to be done. But we did record the vocals over pretty much a 10-day period, all of them. So it was quite intense and challenging.
Yeah.
But we were on a schedule, and you know, we needed to try and keep up with that. And I think that's what we probably do a little bit differently this time, is take a little bit more time to let it organically grow. So it might be that, you know, I'm going to probably look to record some guide vocal tracks, see what works better with some of the guitar, because when you do a bit more with guitar, and certainly when you start to write more with guitar, especially if you're adding in sort of certain elements, not just riffs or just chugging or those sorts of things, sometimes you have to watch for the clash, and you want the complement.
Yeah.
And each instrument, the voice and the guitar, they need their space. And I think that's where it's about trial and error more, and building it a little bit more on the way. And certainly we think we've got the ability to do that. So there's a little work going on at the moment. So I'm listening a little bit more to things that are being recorded and that probably could make it on the final album, actually. And I think with vocals, it would probably be, again, a similar process. So initially go to lay down some live tracks, probably the main, come away, have that space for reflection, add in some more elements with the music, and then going back in and tweaking that and adding some backing vocals and other elements with voice. And I think that's helpful, really, because it just gives you that time to there's certainly things where we think, oh, you know, we could have done that here, actually, couldn't we?
Yeah.
But we just didn't have the space to create it at the time. So yeah, that's really, I think, the difference between the two processes now and how we generally tend to write. So.
Yeah, and that reduces the stress as well, because you know you haven't got a limited time frame, and you can, as you said, take that little more time. Then it's not a case of then kind of looking back and thinking, man, we could have added this on to this song, change a letter here, done this a bit better. Sadly, you know, we had to stick to this schedule that we had at that moment. And there was something you said in your answer there. My mind is starting to evaporate, which is so convenient when that happens live. So a bit like some of my uni essays. But anyway, it was when you were mentioning, Fiona, about listening to the vocals, arranging them with the guitar as well. And I thought that was a really good point, because sometimes you can come across bands and artists where it's not that they're bad musicians or that there's a bad vocalist, but the music can drown out the vocals. So then you can't hear the singer, or there's a particular song where the pacing and structure doesn't quite complement the vocal range, and it doesn't do it justice. That's something I come across sometimes, which I've noticed. So, and particularly if you've got a concept or a theme, it's important to get that right. So you put out the best version what you want to do for the fans. So I know I'm kind of going in here on the lyrics and themes, but I always like to nerd and do deep dives on artist music, what inspires them. So another loaded question, no surprise there. Where do you draw your inspirations from for your songwriting and lyrics? Is it from the world around us, social, history as well, and personal experiences?
Yeah, I think there's an amalgamation of that. But I think during the songwriting process, I tend to, you're really embedded in it at the time. Sometimes you get so absorbed by it. Things are difficult to pay attention to outside of that at times. I think sometimes I get hyper focused with things, so you can lose context. But one of the things that helps me to stay grounded is the relationships we have with each other in the band. And certainly now, I've been with the guys now, working with Gus especially since I think 2018. Yes, I could be wrong. 2016. I missed 2 years then. It's like a pandemic all over again. So 2016. I think it's because we started to really write on finalize the album. That's what I'm thinking. 2018 is a very key year for that. But in terms of, I think I take a lot of support, I think, and inspiration from my bandmates, particularly Gus. He's such a skilled writer, and he's so thoughtful in the process as well. And even now, we had a conversation just last week where we are also looking to go into rehearsal mode for some shows next year. So we're sort of talking about, okay, let's look at songs, because certainly with Enigma, we haven't had the pleasure yet to play it live. So we've got some thinking to do in terms of, okay, so how are we going to orchestrate these tracks for live environment? Most of them are very, what you hear is what you get. But there are a few things you need to pay attention to with a couple of songs. And certainly that's what we are talking about at the moment. So I think it's quite helpful in a way to have those conversations. And even now, our chat turned to, okay, with the new songs. So, how about, how would this feel for you? Do we need to do any changes here? Even talking about, if we're going to do this in a live capacity, because we're going much more to this, we're going much more back to basics, I think, in how we construct things, in that let's keep it real, I think. And I think we've gone through this age in music in the last 10 years, I think certainly in symphonic metal, of doing a lot. There's a lot in there. There's so much in there that, unless you pretty much have a huge production, you're not going to really repeat a lot of it live. And I think that's okay if that's what is it. If it's about the show and it's about being able to replicate that. But in some respects, we're looking at how we can strip things down a little more and keep it a bit more raw. And that's the feel. And I think I listened to stuff over the last couple of years, say compared to maybe 8-9 years ago, and you sort of think, what, it feels a bit more real. I'm not sure, maybe that's just me, but I think that's where we are as well, I think, in it.
No, I think I can relate to that, because I think probably going to upset a whole fan base of people here. I think, look, I'm not bashing any of these singers or musicians, but I think, because this is just my personal view, so folks, you don't have to agree. We've had such manufactured pop music, which we still getting tongue-tied, which we are still receiving. And I think during COVID, because everything just shut down in music, there's absolutely nothing. And now, we've had bands are playing again, the festivals are returning. I think people are just wanting to hear some, and I don't mean this to sound patronizing here, but just some real music again, or whatever the genre, something that's got that real element in the essence, heart in the lyrics and the vocals and the instruments as well. That's not too, I'm trying to put this as delicately as I can, and maybe doing a terrible job of it, but not too squeaky clean where there's, it's kind of disposable lyrics. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with listening to fun tracks that want to make you dance or anything like that. Everything has a place. So maybe that comes into it as well, is the whole symphonic metal scene. Well, if you look at like neoclassical and symphonic as well, it's kind of branched off into that many subgenres. It's even gone into extreme metal, in deathcore as well, parts of death metal. Grease, the classic Septic Flesh, who are a fantastic band. And so it's got so big, and I think to try and put everything into a live show that maybe was on an album is probably nigh on impossible. But if the core essence is there from your music, the core essence is there, people can hear that sound, they know it's you when they see you live. That's I think that's all you can do, and that's the best thing. And as people enjoy it, hopefully they do. That's great. I hope I made some sense there, because I was drowning myself in my own verbal tirade.
I don't know. I think it's the learning curve, as I think you go through as well. I mean, I've been doing this now for over 20 years, and I think I've come through that sort of whole cycle, and things are very cyclical. It's human nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that we're going back to something I probably would resonate with from maybe more like 20 years ago or so. And again, maybe in another 10 years, we'll be back where we were 10 years ago. I think it's just going, that's the kind of thing that seems to happen. It's like fashion,
it always comes back, doesn't it?
It's always a little different, but we love to be nostalgic, I think, as humans, don't we? So I think that's where some of this comes from. But I think also it's about learning, because certainly where I am now in life and career as an artist to where I was 20 years ago is very, very different. And, when you had to think you had to do it all. And I think for, I'm not certainly going to fly the flag and speak for any other musician. And, I'm a female singer, and I've had all of that essence of having to prove myself, having to be having to act in a very different way, and because you are working in a very male dominated industry, so very masculinized at times. So generally I've been through all of that as well, and I think not really going to get bogged down by that. But for me, it's a case of, I think you've got to make it sustainable. That's the key point. And I think that's where, certainly where I am now, as opposed to where I was, sort of 8-10 years ago, physically it's very different. And also, if you're thinking about the context you're working with it, because if you're in a band and you're doing shows, every few months or every few weeks, just one show, it's pretty much down the road, or it's just a few hours drive. It's very different when you're on a big tour, or you're going across, sometimes, we've been there driving, 24 hours solid in a van, and it's exhausting, and you've got to be able to replicate it. And I think that's where sometimes if you try to do too much, you're setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah.
And I think, and if you're so stressed about being able to replicate something that had so many layers in the studio, you're one person, you can't do that. And I think that's where it's about paying attention to the, let's keep it real. Let's make sure that what you're doing now feels real and raw, and it connects. And I think if you can do that, it's fine. And I think even if you have a few layers of tracks here and there, that's okay. That has to be the main thing. That has to be the essence that always works the way it does. In fact, I've been in situations where we're playing and we had some orchestration tracks, playing in the background. They stopped. We had to just keep going. And you do. And actually it worked. And it sounded great. And, we were so worried about it, but actually it didn't need to be. And I think that's the sense. Certainly I've been there where we've been on the stage and I'm the only one with anything to actually be able to do because something has gone wrong. And you have to be able to carry that. And I think you can. And any good band will always have a quick riff and a few vocals they can pull out to do something if the drum kit has a failure for a moment and the skin goes through, or I think once we got caught up in a lead and it pulled it out, and you just have to think on your feet in these situations and always have something you can pull out. And I think if you are quite relaxed enough as a band to laugh about these things and to pull out something quite organic in the moment, then you'll always be fine. But I think you get so caught up with, we've got to do it, it's got to be perfect, it's got to be X, and I think that's what a lot of bands go through. I certainly feel that way when I was younger, and a lot of the bands were forming early stages. You just feel there's so much pressure, and that's what perhaps sometimes trips you up. But certainly we're not there now. We are much more mature, I think.
No, that's a very valid point, because that's when the stress levels can be increased very intensely. A lot of bands then fall apart, or they get the inner turmoil because everything can get too much, and that's a shame. And anything live, even doing something like this can happen. As you just saw there, I had a coughing fit happen just as you were talking, so that was absolutely awesome. But you've just got to keep going, go with it. Disclaimer, folks, I am still recovering from flu, so that's why sometimes I'm looking like I'm possessed in the background, and so don't worry, I'm not weird or anything.
I had that once in an interview. I think we started. I was not well, but I was getting there. And just as we were about to hit the live button, and she was just doing it, I had the most amazing coughing fit, and eyes were streaming bright. Hello, everybody.
It always happens at the most opportune moments. You can, for example, you might have it'll be something a guest says and an answer, and you think, oh man, that's an awesome answer, I'm going to follow up and ask them about this. So you'll start, and then, as like I said earlier, your mind just evaporates on you, and that question just goes. And that's horrible when it happens. There was, but again, you've just got to keep going. And when it comes back, you can ask that question. I've had people sit here a few years ago. One guy's cat jumped on him live during the show, but we just went with it, and people loved it. That was funny. Cat jumping everywhere.
Oh, it's like with lyrics. I mean, I am terrible for remembering words. I used to be better, but I think I've just probably too many plates these days, but spinning in the air at the same time. But I could be terrible with remembering words, which is silly because I've written them and I should know them because I wrote them myself. And sometimes I'm on a stage and I'll hit a blank, and I remember a couple of times I froze in the early days, and then you miss your cue, and then it's all a bit But actually, what I tended to do is just then start. So there's a guy in the red top in the audience. He's got a nice haircut, and you just start thinking random things you can see until then it comes back to you, and you're like, yes, there you go. Yeah. And I think that's just learning these little strategies to just get through, and not become flustered with it. And I think, I can get very flustered, believe me. Yeah. But and certainly the guys in the band would be like, oh, but then you have this mask that you just. It comes on, and you just focus in that moment and get through it.
That's good in a way, though, as well, because it shows that it still keeps it real for you. You're obviously, you're passionate about the music. Those things happen, but then, as you said, with the more experience, and then you go into that professional mode as well. And I liked what you said about creating a sustainable product. Anything where movie, a novel, music, if it's got that good story, good riff, good chorus, good lyrics, you always remember it, whatever era it's from. I want to go back to that. And as you were saying about nostalgia, I mean, when people look at swing and jazz, like Cotton Club, things like that, and I'm like, oh man, that's awesome, let's try and recreate that. Things like that are always eternal and will always come back. And as you were rightly saying, might be a slightly different interpretation of it, but because it's just got that good core component, which is pretty much eternal. I wondered as well, I read about the various tours you've done, lots of them, Russia, which must have been amazing. Maybe not the distance and traveling at times, because I imagine that would have been quite long. So how do you, especially Another loaded question for you, Fiona. How do you generally keep your vocals in check? And particularly as well, the second part of that question, when you're touring, particularly very long distances in places like Russia, do you have to take extra care on your vocals as well because you're on the road for a long time?
Absolutely. And I think it sounds funny for a vocalist to say, but shut up. That's what you do. You have to shut up. And, you know, as much as I'd love to sit there, and sometimes you might have, I mean, we've had situations where I've literally flown in, you know, the night, 2 days before the first show, we've done a quick rehearsal the night before in a local rehearsal room. And I've not seen the guys in 3 months or 2 months or whatever. Or some of them I might have seen, some of them I haven't seen in a while. And all you want to do is catch up and chat. But you know what? No, you have to stop. You have to go quiet and save the voice because it's like, you know, it's your vocal cords, it's a set of tissues and muscles and ligaments and everything. And there's even a little bone in there, apparently. But, you know, it's like anything. If you were constantly playing your guitar, your fingers would be gone by the end of the night. You wouldn't be able to do the show. So you have to think of it like that. It's very, I think drummers and singers have a lot in common, actually. So in the way that breathing supports everything we do. So I think that's quite important as well. So one of the things I struggle a lot with actually on tour, and I take a few things and strategies, is dryness, because especially if you're in a vehicle for a long time, and you know, especially if it's really cold, and we're coming from different countries as well. So I'm used to the cold, the guys are not, and you just have to be so careful that things don't get so dry, because dryness is not a friend for any singer. And even for a drummer, it can dry your chest out a little bit, and it can make breathing a bit difficult. So I think I try and keep ventilation. I try to keep moisture in the air, so a lot of humidification. So I'll even do a bit of steaming. I've got this little mask that's called a humidifier, which is brilliant. It was actually something that was created out of some research with, I think it might have been to do with rugby union and some New Zealanders, because the long distance, they were looking at how, you know, the fatigue and the jet lag can hit. And they did some studies with this particular little, it looks like a little plastic mask you just put on your face. It's clear. And it keeps your own humidity within, but allows clear air in. So it keeps things moist, basically. And certainly on planes, when humidity can be as low as 10% if you're on a typical UK budget airline, it's very bad for the nose, the throat, everything. And all of that, you need it for your performance. So I actually did invest in one of those, and I did use it a bit, and it really did make a difference. But even just a hot cup of tea or a hot cup of water, you know, just breathing that in, taking a lot of care to warm up properly. And sometimes that could be hard. I mean, some venues, you're on the pump, maybe things are running late, you know, you've got to try and get ready, you've got to eat, you've got to, especially for women on the stage, you've got to have the hair and the makeup and everything as well. And, you know, and you sort of just have to make sure that you schedule things, when to eat, you know, making sure you get as much sleep as possible, good quality sleep if you can. Saving the voice, certainly not too much chatting, but you know, I've been there as well on, you know, when the voice is going, you know, when you've picked up a bug traveling, a virus or something, and then again, it's, you know, lots of moisture, lots of fluids, lots of sleep, rest as much as you can, and just keep, you know, gently doing your sort of, you know, warm-ups. That's what gets you through it. I think I did a show once in Paris, and I was starting to feel it that morning, and then woke up and the tonsils were, you know, and it was bad. It was quite a bad impact. I was bad for weeks with it, actually. It was the last show, and it was a shame. And I thought, right, so we sat down, 2 guys ran out to the nearest pharmacy. Let's see whatever we can get, anything, you know, to try to help. You always carry stuff, but we might be able to get some better stuff. The rest of it was like, let's change it up a bit. You stay here for a little longer and rest in the room and sleep as much as you can. And then we looked at the set list, right, because I could still get through some of the range and everything, but I knew that the fatigue would hit, and I probably wouldn't get through the entire set. So it was looking at, okay, what can we cut and how, or what sections can I drop out that the band can do something more interesting with. And we just had a cue for, I'm losing it, like, let's wrap it up. So that's kind of what you do, I think. So occasionally it might be that you have to replace a song with something a little different because you're just not going to get there today.
Yeah.
I've had laryngitis on the road. It's quite awful when that happens.
Nasty.
Yeah, so especially if it's affecting your upper range, you have to start dropping out certain things. But I think also being very careful of your environment, you know, that you're in a loud club, and even things like if you're on a hollow stage, for example, where there's no big structure, that's quite helpful. But if you're actually on a concrete block, the reverberation of the bass can rattle your chest, and it can actually make it harder to breathe.
Right.
And given that I'm an asthmatic as well, sometimes it can actually rattle things a little bit too much, and you feel it a little bit. So it's like things like caffeine shorten the vocal cords and things like that, so they can tighten things up. So it's about knowing yourself, how your body responds, and then sort of working yourself around that. But I think the main thing is water, quiet, and sleep. That's it. Sounds boring, really, doesn't it?
No. A lot of things I should do myself. It's funny when I've been talking to bands and PR companies and people I know from the scene in emails at the moment, and I've said, I'm trying to keep the shows around 60 and 90 minutes at the moment with recovering, and they all know I can talk for the world. And especially if someone mentions something nerdy I'm interested in, it's like, forget what that topic was supposed to be. I'll just hone in on it, and that's it. There's a mass nerdathon, and then I'm a naturally hyper person as well, so then I get more amped and more amped. And I'm my own worst enemy in that regard. And then later, of course, you'll feel it. It's like, no, we should do that. But I'm getting the sense as well, generally taking good care of yourself, staying fit and healthy is just good for keeping those vocals in check anyway. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Fiona, and again, I'm going to behave and chew out we don't give too much away about the new album, but I was looking at the artwork for Enigma, and I was wondering, are you all going to work with the same person that did the artwork for that album?
I'm not sure. I think we'd have to ask the question. Actually, interestingly, the artwork done by my very good friend Paul, who you might have recognised from looking at the inlay of the album, was actually playing bass for us on the album as well. And I work with Paul Cully in Apparition, in the other band, the UK-based band that I've worked with on and off for years. Not very active these days, but we had an album come out 2018. It's pretty good. It was much more symphonic. There was lots of, I think at one point I was singing 15 parts together, or I don't know.
Wow.
Just we did some really silly things, I think, but it was great. It was great fun. But we're never going to play them live, so that's okay. But we did do some live shows though, and there was some great reception there. But we're not that active as a band. But Paul, he played guitar in Apparition and actually did an immense amount of songwriting on the last album, and he's very, very skilled. In fact, he wrote a couple of passages of lyrics for Forever Winter actually. So
nice.
because I'd come up with an idea and he sort of said something back. I was like, oh, that's the one, let's use that. So I think he's a very multi-skilled person, in the essence of an artist, and he created the artwork here for Enigma, as he did for Apparition as well, which was very, very different look. He built the websites, all sorts of things in terms of the Apparition site. So, he's a very talented and creative artist in his own right, especially musically. And certainly I would, like to think he might be able to do something, but he's quite busy, so I'm not sure. But I think we're very far away from that at the moment, and I don't think we quite yet have the visualization of what we want it to look like. And I think it's always good sometimes to work with new people. I mean, I really loved working with Patrick Elias for the video for Reborn, and I'd certainly love to do a video with him again. But equally, there are other videos as well, and other videographers we can work with. And I think there's some good ideas coming out from a couple of people. I think one based in the States and one based actually in Athens, conveniently. But again, I think this case of we will probably go back and do some repeat work with past professionals we've worked with on the album. But I also think we'd like to introduce something new, something we haven't done before, or a different take, because I think everybody has slightly different ideas and something to bring. So it's good to sometimes bring in fresh eyes and fresh perspective. Yeah,
it is, get those different interpretations. Other bands have mentioned at times where they haven't been able to get a vision in mind for the cover to go with the album. They've just it's been an artist they've worked with or someone new and just said, right, just design something based on what you think of the title. said, and what they've come up with is been amazing. So that's always a good thing, certainly with videos going forward as well. I often think for bands now, they often can be like mini movies, especially if it's concept driven. Well, the carrying must be so much fun to do. Not if you're in a very cold part of the world filming it, isn't, but anyway.
Well, I'm quite excited actually about the different things that are coming, into digital and digital space, and certainly looking at what Within Temptation have done with looking at the CGI and AI and the technologies that we can do. I think there's some really interesting things going on. I mean, when 20 odd years ago or 10 years ago, it was like, oh no, it was terrible. But actually, this is looking pretty interesting, and even some of the modern day photo apps you can get on your phone now that can take pictures of you and create. And I think there's so much you could do in that space, so much more experimentation, even if it's draft. So you say, this is the one we need to go with, let's try and repeat that in the real world. And I think that I'd love to experiment a little bit more with what we could do with digital technology. I think it's just so fascinating. And again, I think it's a new thing in the industry. It's starting to really, certainly I think in a lot of spaces, the whole AI stuff is really taking off. It's been around for a while, but it's taken off in different ways. Interested in it. Yeah,
it is. So with that said on AI, this was a topic that came up with some guests quite a number of episodes ago, and we looked at the positive side of it, like what you've just mentioned. But then I asked them, and I'm going to ask you as well, the negative. Are you concerned as a singer if anybody then starts to plagiarize your voice and music with AI, or do you think we're at that stage where we still, because it's still new, we kind of don't know?
I think if you've got a significant budget and you spend a lot of time, I mean, just listening to Within Temptation talk about how long it took just to get one particular reel, and that's the thing. And if you've got that kind of investment, then you might be able to come up with something almost, but it's still never going to fool the human ear, I don't think. I think I would know if it wasn't me. I'd also know because I'd know I didn't do it. So I remember that, and I think there's always going to be fear when change comes. There's always that discomfort that comes with it. But I think we're a long way from anything that would fool us into thinking this is a whole performance. I also think that people, they love to connect with somebody. So I don't think you can just start making people up from scratch. The AI new singer of the day is, this person that doesn't even exist. I think that's just a step too far for people generally. Anyone I know anyway. That many people, and perhaps some people would love to think, oh, this is an essence. It's not a human being, and maybe that's where things will go at some point. But for me, I think that the connection to that humanity, that human person that's got ideas, they've got personality, they've got their own sense of things and their own creativity. And I don't think as great as AI has the potential to be in different spaces. I'm not sure about the creativity space. Maybe there are certain things, but I don't know. I'm not yet convinced that it's going to take us there.
Yeah, this topic has come up on quite a few episodes I've mentioned, and I think we're still, because it's still new in how we're using it, implications. I kind of don't quite know. I can see where people are concerned with possibly their music or voice being plagiarized or ripped off. Yes, I get that. And you get already those like comedy videos with someone, dancing with the voice, and it doesn't really sound like that person's voice. You were saying it a little, but not entirely. So I think we're still at too much of the early stages. But I was just thinking when you were talking there, Fiona, it's not AI, but a positive sense. If you look at Damon Albarn's band, Gorillaz, and I liked what they did. Yeah, it's got his voice, but the character and the art and everything, that fun feel, I thought that was really, really great stuff. So I guess we just have to see. I get, because it's in the news a lot with the kind of sinister side to it, how it can possibly influence politics and everything else. But yeah, I think we just have to see at the moment.
You've got to have a growth mindset with these sorts of things, because if you fear it too much, it might put a barrier up to actually learning about how it works and actually the pros, the cons, benefits, limitations. So you've got a really balanced perspective that you know how it could be used, but you also know how to challenge it when it's not working for you. You know, that's the essence, I think, for me.
Yeah, it's trying to reach that balance, isn't it? I'm curious as well. What do you think, in your opinion, both as a singer and fan of symphonic metal, what is it about it that encapsulates that emotion and romance and deep human feelings within it? You know, what particularly about the genre is it that grabs you in that regard?
I think it's such an interesting question. There's so many lenses you can put on this, and I think, you know, growing up, you know, from a very working class background, you know, we didn't have a lot. We could really afford music lessons and instruments and those sorts of things growing up. You know, it was difficult to access that sort of stuff, and some people it is, for other people it's not. And but one thing we were able to do, due to a family connection, for someone who worked there, was get tickets to the Royal Northern College of Music now and again. I used to love to go because I used to just love watching all these different instruments come together in one, and everyone had its, you know, every instrument had its part to play and its thing to say, and that to me was just so powerful. And the feel and the swell of it, and the fact that this was just a bunch of people coming together and creating this amazing sound, and they're all doing it in unison. And that to me, that togetherness, just, you know, I guess that's why I've never wanted to be a solo artist or been interested in, you know, even people, oh, get up and just do a few songs on the mic. And I'm like, it's not me. I want to be with the people around me, you know, I want to be with the band. It's part of something that you bring in together. That's what I feel comfortable with. So I think that's what always attracted me from a young age. And certainly growing up with, you know, general music of the 80s, rock, metal, you know, thrash, that was kind of the bread and butter of, you know, my youth, so to speak. But, you know, there's not many women in that, and there's only the odd one or two here and there. And certainly as someone who hadn't grown up playing a particular instrument, then I could never really see it. You know, I loved singing along, I loved enjoying listening to it, and the whole performance and the mad hair and the stages, the outfits or whatever. You know, it's always something, you know, it's the whole thing. It wasn't just necessarily about the music, but, you know, the music was the one thing I got to have at any time I wanted with my little, you know, cassette player. But I think for me, when, you know, as we started to get towards the turn of the century and bands started to break through, like Nightwish Within Temptation, I started to hear these elements that I'd grown up with but could never always completely access, but that I always carried with me. And I started to see a place for myself with it. Because I thought, well, this, you know, they're doing it, so that means I could. And then other people, you know, in Manchester, in the Northwest, started to get interested. What if we had a female vocalist? You know, and actually, you know, went through the whole, you know, getting difficulties in a venue because they didn't think I was actually in the band and things like that. You know, the whole thing you go through, all that sort of stuff. But, you know, you just take it with a, you know, a smile on your face, and, you know, everyone learns something from it. And I think that's what it was for me, is that these bands started to come through, and I started to see a place for myself within that, and a place for other girls and other women. And that to me felt good. And, you know, it was my chance to have a go. I think that was nice. That felt nice. So it was good to see people there. And I think one of the earliest bands that I really got into was Looking at Coil, actually. I really enjoyed what they were doing and sort of ambience, the feel of that. And certainly, you know, then I think it was Nightwish. I picked up on them through something I'd seen somewhere, and that really started to keep my interest. Within Temptation was another big influence. And then Evanescence, even, you know, I think you know, there's some really good stuff going on within their music, within the songwriting, especially within the way the voice is used. So I think that started to come together. But for me, I've always been a bit of a fan of industrial metal as well. So I guess that's where, you know, in symphonic music and symphonic metal, for me, I've never felt 100% comfortable. And I think that's why Fall on the Rise kind of attracted me a little bit, because it had that darker element, that harder element to it.
Yeah, the horror, as I could hear. Yeah.
And I love working with another vocalist, to be honest. I really do. I love being able to step back and just feel it, you know, and someone else has to go. And I think that's it. I think that's what I like to do more. And I think that's what really attracted me to join Fall on the Rise, was the whole concept album was so interesting. The orchestration was so clever, and so such emotion in there. And the fact that I got to work with a male vocalist as well, which was fantastic. I've never really done that before.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned industrial because that's kind of like the dark opposite. If you like, very very dark dystopian. That whole scene has so many different subgenres as well, even in the electronic kind of spin-offs from it as well. So much there. But that grabs me as well, not just because I love sci-fi and I'm a colossal nerd, but just for the feelings it has. Again, it's like the dark side, I guess, of it. Anyone who doesn't know anything about metal will be like, what is this guy promoting here? It's like dark side this, dark side that.
I have to be honest, I am a Rammstein fan. I do really enjoy their music, and especially the stuff that Richard Kruster's done on his own album as well. So I do like a lot of that. I like the pace.
Yeah, I mean, there's some classic bands. God's Flesh.
Yeah, another good one.
I mean, the other was the legendary vocalist for Sacrilege from Birmingham, crossover band, and another band from there who've got a really good female vocalist, Luna.
Yes, I've heard them. They're really good.
Oh, they're fantastic. They do one of the earlier albums. They do a cover of Hymn's "Wicked Game," which obviously is Chris Isaac originally, and before I heard a Luna's version, Hymn's cover was always, I thought, yeah, this is the best version because it was essentially the same song, just a heavy metal version. And then I heard a Luna's, and man, it has this, it's doom, obviously, so it's got the slow build up, but it's got this really nice gothic edge to it as well, and the vocals are wonderful. So, anyone out there, definitely check that cover out as well.
Yeah, I remember hearing. I think we used to do the Birmingham. Well, it's kind of West Midlands Dames of Darkness festival. That was a thing for a while in the last decade. And my bandmate David Homer, he used to coordinate that and put that on with some fantastic bands because he always liked to get something different. He liked to have different bands from different genres. He had a fantastic band, and I remember meeting a band, Morning Sun, actually from Chile. And their doom, and they were really really cool band, and I really like their sound. And I've listened to that, and thought, and even bands like Teresa's, I find things like that really interesting, and I like to sit back and just really listen to what's going on. And I think that's the sort of stuff that I kind of find myself attracted to, as well as the symphonic side. But I guess I like to have symphonic metal that breaks things up a little bit as well. And that's why I like. I mean, within Temptation, a bit chameleons really keep reinventing themselves a little bit in every album, and it keeps them. I think it keeps them going. So I've always found something to enjoy on every album, actually. Same as Nightwish, and they've gone more into folk, and that's certainly part of growing up. In an Irish family, we had a fair bit of that kind of influence. You grew up in all these old centres where there's always some family fuss, and there's always fiddler, always something going on. There's a reel playing somewhere. So I think I enjoyed, a lot of that. So I quite enjoy a bit of eclectic music, but it always comes back to the metal is always in there somewhere.
Yeah, and we have a lot here. We have loads in those Celtic punk bands, and as well. I can relate to what you're saying there. On my mum's side, they are from Yorkshire and the Southern Irish on my mum's side, and then my dad's, Northeast and Welsh. So I can definitely relate to that. Because you just grow up hearing that kind of music as well, passed down, and it's always. I love the energy in it though, and it's still got that deep feeling in that kind of music too. I'm starting to get really hyper now. I'll turn it back into talking about Falling Arise for a moment before I keep going off topic. Be like, is this guy going to ask about Falling Arise? Yes, I will, folks. Don't worry. I know you have a tour coming up in Italy next year, starting in March on the 21st in Milano. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Let's get that out there for folks.
It's a new development actually, so it's only really just recently been announced, and we're going to be playing with a few different bands. I think the lineup's actually changed. I think there's in Rome, playing in Rome at one point, and there's quite a few bands on the bill, and I'm one of these people that doesn't really follow a lot of the sort of more sort of death metal scene, and I struggle to read some of the band names, so I will be really transparent about that. They look beautiful, but I'm thinking I don't know how to say that one or what it's supposed to say. But I think that's the beauty of it, because it's a bit of mystery, isn't it? So it's quite intriguing. But yeah, we're going to be doing a few shows in Italy. So I think we start in Milan and then Rome. I think Massa as well. I think he's in there in March. So it's going to be, it's interesting because it's blowing off the cobwebs for us because it's been a while. So, and I think this is going to be helpful. And certainly from my point of view, you know, I have had some health challenges which have affected my mobility, and you know, I can't walk in the same way that I used to and move around in the same way that I used to. So it's going to be quite interesting because the performance, I used to run around the stage a lot, and I used to love to be moving constantly and here and there. And I'm not going to be moving as much as I used to, and that's fine because I think actually some of these venues that quite excite me because they are mid-sized or a little smaller. So I quite like the idea of the intimacy of that. But I think I'm going to have to just slow down a bit on stage and, you know, save my energy and my breath for what I'm there to deliver. But I'm going to miss the kind of physicality of the performance. But I think at the same time, it's going to allow a better connection with the audience. Perhaps I'm going to do things in a slightly different way. And it's a bit of an experiment, I suppose, to see what's really going to work for us. But I think given the venues that we're playing at, the bands that we're playing with, it is a great safe space to do that. I think it's going to be a really great tour, and we're looking forward to working with all the different bands that are right across the bill, really. Definitely heard that, you know, the sort of the lead band headlining. So it's, you know, it's going to be, I think, a really great opportunity. We've never done Italy before, actually. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to connect with that fan base. You know, we have, you know, people following us in Italy. I love Italians, fantastic. You know, it's always so expressive and, you know, and obviously we were working with Giacomo on the last album, you know, who did some fantastic guitar work for us on Enigma, and he's Italian, and I always enjoyed listening to him about the culture. So and of course the food, you know, we all love food.
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful country. I'm actually learning Italian, but long way off being fluent. I was learning quite a few languages, and it got too much learning multiple languages, so I dropped down to 2, which is Spanish and Italian. Spanish is my next strongest after English, but my Italian is very basic. It's a few words and that's it. And you know, being able to say I like ice cream or something in Italian doesn't qualify at the moment to have a conversation with people. I'm like, no, that doesn't count. When I can actually say a little bit more than that, you know.
Well, I tried to learn Greek for obvious reasons and failed miserably. No, I wasn't too bad. I managed to, you know, learn a few key phrases and the connectives, I think, to be able to construct a sentence. But I was still coming out with, I think I was trying to ask for if they had basmati rice, and I told I smell bad or something. So I'm still learning. And of course, Gus is a very excellent teacher in relation to the slang element of the language. Demetrius, our manager, who's wonderful, he's a great friend of mine, and he's actually helping me learn the correct way to say things, you know, because he's got that background of in his language base. So I really enjoy listening to how things of the language translates. How would I say that in Greek? Or actually, this phrase, how would that sound in Greek to you know, if you were saying it? How would it actually directly translate to English? And it's not what you think it is, and it's quite interesting. I really think people who can speak other languages are just fantastic. I can't, and it's something I always wish I could. And I just think it's such a hard thing to do. And when anyone says to me, "Oh, you know, English isn't my first language," sorry, I'm like, I have no other language, so I am no one to speak. I just, you know, think it's admirable that you can talk in 2 different languages or 3 or 4.
I'm the same as you. I know a few words in Greek, and one very naughty word, which pretty much everybody remembers, begins with an M.
Yes,
you know the word. You know the word. Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting because friends in Greece, usually male friends, would say it in a positive way. Hey, you know, I'm not going to say
You
know, they'd say it as a kind of, you know, hey, you, it's great to see you, as well as, you know, oh, you've annoyed me, go away, you know. So yes.
But I think languages as well are like music. It's different sounds, a different structure. Some can be melodic, some more direct and harsher, and I've just always found them absolutely fascinating. The unfortunate thing is and I'm not complaining here, we're doing this now with talking to people nearly every day. That's why I was studying 6 languages at one point, and I thought I've got to drop down here because I'm not getting the chance to focus. My Spanish was starting to suffer. And I thought, right, keep it to your next strongest language, and then look at one. What do you really enjoy? Where it was Italian. I love how it sounds, musical. And I thought, right, there you go. That's what you can focus on. Do you have any other? This may be too early to say, but I'm going to ask it because somebody would want to know. Do you have any other tours or shows planned for next year, or is it way too early to say at the moment?
It's quite early, but we are looking at a couple of festivals in the summer, and I think we're purposely not over committing because we need space to focus on the album, and you can't do it all together, and we need to be in the right space for that. And I think the album is the priority. So I think there's going to be perhaps slightly less in terms of the touring next year, whilst we finish, getting to the finalisation of the writing process and start to draft everything up and do the guiding tracks for everything, so that we're in a space to get into the studio. And getting into the studio, as I say, we did it very intensively because we had a lot of touring commitments. We were out and about everywhere across 2016, 17, part of 18, and that was quite harsh. And I think that we just need to slow it down a little bit and make sure we've got space for the album, and actually that we can put all of ourselves into it and not be sort of distracted or pulling back to other things. Because, at the end of the day as well, music these days, it cannot pay your mortgage, your bills, whatever. You've got to be able to have the space to be able to support yourself, whether that's in other musical projects or your day job, whatever. So I think we just all need to be mindful and not put ourselves under too much stress and pressure as well, because that's going to subdue the creative process. It will interrupt it. I think we need to be in the space where we've got that freedom to write, to record. So that's where we are. But I think that once we get the recording of the next album out of the way, and it's certainly then on its own journey of post-production and sort of developing the campaign and all sorts of things around it, the launch, then we can start getting out there and coordinating it. I mean, we were looking to do that in 2020 because we had Enigma come out, but it hit. We couldn't change the launch date. It was too set in stone by that point, when everything, especially in the UK, the end of March, just went poof. Pandemic. Our album came out in April, so it was early April. So there wasn't any way we could stop that. We were hoping that everyone was at the time, but by July, August we'll be out. We had to cancel so much. We had to pull back from everything. And that's a shame because we coordinated it to really explode that year because the album was out. And that's really what you want to do as a band. Hey, here's our album. Then here we are on the road. Come and see us do it. So I think that's where we're looking to with the next one, and to make sure that we focus our energy, our time, our resources on getting that album ready to go, and then we can get out there and tour it.
Yeah. I really look forward to hearing it. I'm very interested to see what themes will be there with the lyrics, the concepts as well. Again, some of the nerds, so find all that kind of thing interesting. Just before I wrap it up today and the rest of my throat, sadly, is there any other music or bands as a singer, and it, again, doesn't have to be metal, what you would like to perform in?
What I'd like to perform in?
Yeah, sorry, what would you, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Is there any other kind of music that you would like to sing, whether it's another style of metal or non-metal?
Okay. It just sounds a bit funny, but I'd love to have a go at an opera. But just I'd probably be really bad at it, to be fair. So certainly, I think I've not had the right kind of schooling. My voice isn't that kind of voice. I think I can do elements, but to keep it real. But actually, I wouldn't mind doing something a lot more folky, to be fair. A lot more ambient, and even thinking about some of the doom stuff, and sort of thinking about bands, like Morning Sun and things like that. I think we've got some. I think it's slower, it's different. It's certainly not the sort of thing perhaps I would want to maybe tour, but certainly I'd love to do a project like that. I think would be really interesting. Or something a bit more folky, and actually that would be something I would like to get out and do. I'd love to work with people doing fiddle, violins, wind instruments, the flutes, everything. I love pipes, any kind of pipe, always fun. So I'd love to be able to have a go at that actually, but maybe one day.
Yeah. It's certainly interesting. And in Doom as well. Well, you've got Gothic Doom, the subgenre. There is I'm not the biggest black metal fan in the world, and this artist is more kind of a melodic black metal, I guess. And they do have the harsh vocals mixed in there as well. And I'm probably going to butcher the name. Called for Vermilia, I think. They're from Finland, and it's the I guess if you think of the Last Kingdom TV series.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
Ivor, who does those vocals on the soundtrack. It's a bit
yeah.
like those kind of vocals mixed
Nice.
with very, I guess, melodic Scandinavian, metal, kind of pagan metal, I guess.
Yeah.
And there is harsh vocals there as well, but there's something really enchanting about it, and it caught my ear, and I thought, man, this is pretty good stuff. How it's going from the clean then to the harsh, and normally that's not, a genre that I'm the biggest fan of, but it's very interesting.
I always very much admired over the years, Lisa Gerrard. I've always enjoyed the stuff that she does, and yeah, that's something, because it's very ambient and this sort of surreal feel to it, but also the kind of ethnic elements drawing in different things. So even Enya, there's some really great stuff there.
Was Lisa Gerrard, was she the lady that sang on the Gladiator soundtrack?
She was, yes, yeah.
Oh yeah, the sorrow, yeah.
Yeah, but she's done lots of other things too. But she doesn't actually use any known language with her lyrics.
Wow.
It's I can't remember the exact term that she uses to describe it, but it's basically non-syllabic. It's basically just sounds. It's not an actual language or anything. So, but it's just she just sings with passion and what she feels, and this sound communicates the emotion of what I want to convey. So it doesn't have to be a word that's known to any human ear. And I like that. That's a really interesting way of doing things.
Yeah, because that Gladiator soundtrack, her vocals, the sorrow that you can hear, and that just matches the story of the movie as well. And anyone who sits there and can't feel that come in them, or even have that, even water up in their eyes. Yes, I admit it, folks. Outside of the brutal mosh, I can cry. Like, how dare you?
Yeah, I think I remember hearing her work prior to the film as well as the film and after, and it was just like, wow, so moving. And I think that's probably, if I really strip it down and actually think about it, that's probably where a lot of, a bit of inspiration for me, a bit of a role model in a way, I suppose, to wanting to convey emotion in what I do. But it's not always so easy to do that, I think.
I bet it's not.
I'm still learning how, and I think that's where where I am. It's a journey. Life is a journey, and if you say you've learned everything and you're finally finished, then you've got a rude awakening coming.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as you just saw there, I'm learning even with my questions. When I asked them, as I said, I'll just rephrase that one, because sometimes it doesn't come out the way I want it to.
Oh no, I was picturing myself in a kabuki or something, a Japanese opera, like giving it some. I don't know. That's where my mind went when you asked the question. I'm thinking I better check I've understood this, because I might say something a bit silly. But I have been taking note of your posters and thinking, that's a nice one there. So I think my head's going in that space of sort of.
Yeah, well, it's outside of music. I'm fascinated with Japanese culture, martial arts. I mean, I'm a martial artist myself, and I'm planning to hopefully feature some content like that on the channel soon, just for something different outside of the music. And it's probably the only area that I'm more passionate about than music. I've realized I've probably just upset every guest ever by saying I was coming on the show. I love music, don't get me wrong, I really do. I'm so passionate about it. But I think it's just people will think, oh, martial arts, it's learning, just about hitting someone, learning to fight.
No, it's an art. It's like dance. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's the spiritual side, the philosophy as well.
Yeah, very centering. And I think I remember I've never studied myself, but I know people have, family and so forth. And one of the first things that was learned was about self-discipline and self-regulation.
Yeah, it's very humbling.
Self-awareness. And I think that's about when not to fight is just as important as when to defend. And I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at life and being in tune with the environment. I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, and even that traditional Japanese music absolutely grabs me because it's got that deep feel in it, within it. Even the kabuki players, as you mentioned, all of it. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. There's even now what's been getting popular in recent years, but it's still relatively small. Is like ninja samurai themed bands, which it's quite nice because it's different. I know we've had that kind of, a lot of the ethnic bands who are paying homage to their culture and civilizations, which I think is great as well. And now it's nice to have another side to that. But yeah,
I was lucky to meet a Japanese band actually at one of the festivals I did with Apparition about 6-7 years ago. Sidol from Japan, and brilliant people. They're more electronic sort of metal and
look them up,
electronica. Really great people as well. And I think I actually might have come over. I don't think I was here at the time, but they were in the UK not so long ago. And I couldn't see them because I wasn't here, but it was like, but I would have gone. And I always thought one day it'd be great to get out there and actually see them, see them as well. So.
Yeah, I talked with a guy this week from a Swiss thrash band called Comaniac, and he said they did a tour in Japan in 2018, and I said that must have been really special, and he said absolutely fantastic. And he said the people out there so nice, but he said they were so supportive. All the venues we played, and some of them were small, but they were absolutely packed, and everyone was there for the music. He said
it's a big one for me is to tour Japan. That would be fantastic, and I hope we get to do it with Fallen Arise. I think we'd potentially go down quite well there. I think actually, given some of what I've heard and learned about.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the Japan scene, I mean, they're seen for metal there and even punk and hardcore as well. They've got such a good, vibrant scene, which still a lot of people don't know about for all genres too. And they really do support the bands and music out there. And I've heard nothing but good things about it. That's one of my dreams to go visit there, both for the history of it. I think it would be fascinating. I'm starting to get really hyper. So I'm going to. But what I like to do, Fiona, when I ever get to the end of a show, I always like to give guests the opportunity to promote anything they want. Obviously, promote their own band, But if there's anything else they want to shout out, whether it's music, people, absolutely anything, I always give them the floor. So if there's anything you would like to shout out or promote, Fiona, floor is yours.
Thank you. I think given the spirit of why I'm here today, I will stick with the band. And certainly it would be fantastic if people out there haven't had the chance yet to pick up Enigma and have a listen to it, then I thoroughly recommend that you do. And I hope that you enjoy it. I think you will. We've had some really great feedback on the album. And certainly, keep an eye on us, join our social medias and so forth, and follow what we do. We will be doing more next year. And, I think that's the main thing. But I think generally, keeping it real, keep listening, keep growing, and keep enjoying new music. That's the main thing.
Definitely.
Keeps us all connected.
Definitely. Couldn't have put it better myself. Stay open, folks. So much music out there, and there's always someone you haven't heard of, and keep those minds open. I want to thank you for coming on and talking with me today and tolerating my verbal babblery as well and off-topic randomness. But it's been really interesting to talk to you about Fallen Arise and all the other areas that we discussed as well. I want to send a shout out to Taja at Split Screen Management and Productions for helping connect us as well. Grazie. Really appreciate it. And shout out to all of you who are watching or watch later. Always appreciated. Don't forget to follow Fallen Arise. All the links will be in the description, and I'll see you later this evening with Black Daggers. Everybody take care, and it's uncomfortable pause moments where I hit end stream and there's the delay where I do look like
Thank you for having me on the show, and thanks again on behalf of Fallen Arise for picking us up and getting us out there.
You're very welcome. Welcome on any time.